I hope I'm not going to get misconstrued about this, because I think it's kind of a left field take. And there's absolutely exceptions. But I want to talk about a general rule that I have observed. I've been playing tabletop role-playing games since about 2002. I started out in 3rd edition D&D, went on to 4th edition D&D, eventually went into 5th edition D&D when it was released, because I didn't know any better. And during that time, I also kind of dabbled in other RPGs. I played a few sessions of Shadowrun, a few sessions of like Mutants and Masterminds, those kinds of things. Those kind of like, they're definitely heavier related to D&D kind of approaches to role-playing. It wasn't until I started playing 5th edition that I really branched out into like narrative-focused RPGs. Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse, Kids on Brooms, etc. And so from my aggregate experience with tabletop role-playing games and the kinds of designs and character building philosophies and approaches that these games might have, I have observed one thing. I've observed a number of things. Today we're going to be talking about this particular thing that I have observed, which is that smaller chunks, or more granular character designs tend to yield better characters, or a better representation of the player's initial fantasy. So if you have, say, 3 or 4 big decisions to make about your character, those are going to be far less granular than making 1 or 2 small decisions every level, or every time you advance, or something to that effect. You know what I mean? So, for example, and we can do the classic Sabrock comparison of 5th edition to 4th edition. In 5th edition, like martial classes mostly don't make decisions when they level up, except maybe at 3rd level. At 3rd level, you pick a subclass, of course. But other than that, like maybe you'll pick a fighting style, I guess. Yeah, for a lot of martial classes, that's the decision that you make, is like fighting style, maybe, and then your subclass. For casters, you're also picking up spells. So you have, a set number of spells that you're picking up, and those can often be customized on a per day basis. But these are like relatively chunky kinds of decisions that you're making. And for the most part, the only real permanent choices that you're making are subclass and maybe like fighting style or warlock invocations or something like that. Those things that you aren't able to change during the progress of the in-game days. In 4th edition, you have a bunch of decisions to make it at level 1. A bunch of decisions to make it level 1. They're all meaningful decisions. Well, not all of them. Most of them are meaningful decisions. Some of the decisions are kind of foregone conclusions. I will not pretend that there aren't trap and anti-trap options in 4th edition. But for the most part, more than half of the decisions you make, you're going to make like a dozen choices at character creation, and more than half of them are real meaningful decisions that no one can tell you this is definitely the right answer, not this. They are value calls, judgment calls, sort of flavor calls that the player needs to make for themselves. And then at every level, you're either picking a power or a feat or both. But the feats are smaller. You get a feat every even level, plus 1 at the beginning of each tier, of course. But the feats are much smaller than they are in 5th edition. So in 5th edition, the feats are big, chunky, because you're only going to get like 4 or 5, I think, over the course of like 20 levels of progression. Maybe 2 in most campaigns you're only getting. So they're kind of big, and they come packaged with ability score increases, or they compete with ability score increases depending on which version you're playing. In 4th edition, of course, they are not only smaller, they don't compete with ability score increases. They don't have them included in. And so you're able to sort of more modularly control like what sorts of things your character has and can do. But I think an even better comparison than 4th edition to 5th edition is actually D&D in general to a game like, what I was thinking of today was actually Fabula Ultima. Because in D&D, you kind of tend to make some big decisions early on in your character's career, and then for the most part, you just coast with those. And so those are very few, very large, very non-granular decisions that you're making about who your character is and what they do and what they can do. Whereas in Fabula Ultima, you're making a lot of smaller decisions, more decisions and smaller decisions. Because, you know, in Fabula Ultima, you go to level 50. So there's actually 45 levels of progression. And every time you level up, you get a new feature. So you have to pick a new feature every time you level up. A new feature from one of your multiple classes, probably multiple classes that you're working on at any given time. And even if you're down to only one class that you're working on, you could at any moment start another class, unless you already have 3 unmastered classes, of course. And this strikes me as, because I was thinking today, someone on Discord was talking about a character concept that they were trying to build, and they're trying to be true to the original idea. Because there's 2 basic ways to build a character in an RPG. Either you start with the mechanics and you come up with a concept that fits those mechanics, or you start with a concept and then you have to find mechanics to fit that concept. That's a lot harder because you don't necessarily know when you are creating the concept if the game is going to support that, and sometimes it won't. And then you have to do more work if it will work at all. And so like that, I mean, that's true of any RPG, but in D&D, I think it's a lot harder to do it that way because the game's options are so much more limited. You get fewer choices. They are much less modular. And so then I was thinking like, well, it feels like any character concept that I can think of is easier to build and better represented in a game like Fabula Ultima than it is in D&D. And that's including 4th edition, 5th edition, 4th edition, 3rd edition. Like they all have like the way that D&D approaches character ideas is that the designer comes up with a character idea and builds a class that follows that idea. Which, I mean, to an extent, they try to be kind of broad so that it can fit adjacent ideas as well. And if you have enough classes, then you can cover a very wide range of ideas and represent mechanically those ideas. And so players tend to sort of gravitate towards that established territory. Then you have games like Fabula Ultima, where the classes aren't like, this is our idea of what a character should be, as much as it is a package of, here are thematically related ideas that you can use to build whatever concept you have come up with. Fabula Ultima assumes that you have a character idea, and you just need to figure out how to build it. And so it gives you the tools to do so. And it facilitates this via the much smaller individual choices that you're using to build your character. So what I've observed is that characters tend to be more true to their original concept, assuming that they are not initially based in the mechanics of the game in which they exist, which could be. I had several characters that were built that way, where it's like, I see a mechanic, or I see an option, or I see a class, and I say, I want to build that. Perfectly valid, but I would say that probably most people, most of the time, start with a character concept first and then have to find mechanics that fit it. And when you do it that way, it is a lot easier in games where the mechanics are smaller, more granular. And it's kind of, I think it's fundamentally why, when it comes to 4th edition versus 5th edition, why I very, very much prefer 4th edition's take on feats, which is that they are smaller and more frequent. Because it gives me as a player more control, more agency. You know, there's the magic word, agency. I'm always talking about giving people agency and protecting agency. It's good. If we say it a few more times, it stops meaning anything. So this is, I think, why I prefer 4th edition's feat system to 5th edition's feat system, in addition to a number of other reasons that I may or may not have talked about already several times. But just in general, smaller, more granular, finer choices create more opportunities for players to build the character that they have conceived of. And so I think that is probably a superior approach to, here are some very big choices. You make one choice very early on, and it's going to be like a defining set of mechanics for your character. I think that's probably not quite as good for the modularity aspect.